All right, hey everyone. This is Rudy. It's December the 31st, the year 2016. It's around 6:41 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I wanted just to take a moment, collect my thoughts, and make a video with my thoughts. This has to do with the Kent Hovind is Innocent DVD series. If you're not interested in this, then this video is not for you, obviously. But I feel like as I go through this 12 hours of video, that at some points I need to take a break probably after each video and just collect my thoughts with what the latest is, what I understand the situation to be, and then, as I go forward, so I can go back and say that was my state of mind, this is what I was thinking at that point in time, and these are the highlights of my journey to dig deeper into this legal aspect. And for those of you that know me, know that this is very against my grain. It's like pulling teeth, right? Digging into the details of man-made legal laws is absolutely against my nature, right? I'll read the Bible all day long, and I love digging deep into like scripture and God's law, but when you tell me that I need to spend a tremendous amount of time digging into United States Code, Section 42, Title 18, Statute 52, man, my brain really resists that. But you know what? If Brady Byrum can spend 15 months of his life and dedicate himself to developing a video series that proves beyond all doubt that Kent Hovind is innocent of all the charges brought against him, and if I can contribute in any little small way to Judge Margaret Worston Rape Catherine Rogers and Michelle Heldemeyer going to prison along with IRS agent Scott Schneider, who I believe conspired to target Kent Hovind on vague and unethical and illegal conspiracy that they had to specifically target an innocent man because they wanted to shut him up. And if I can contribute to that by going through this and filling out the forms and being one of the people who do that, and I hope it's one of many, then I'm going to try my best. So I'm going to take a pause here after the first video. I'm going to share with you my notes. I'm going to respond to an article that came out by Peter Riley just yesterday, and then I'm going to share with you what I think in my retort to that. And this is what this video is going to be about. And so many of you know that Kent Hovind is Innocent website. It points you to these videos. Okay, this is part 3. I'm gonna specifically, I'm taking a pause after Kent Hovind is Innocent Part 1 Introduction and Part 2 Legal Definitions and Case Law. Okay, and then I'm gonna respond to this article that just came out yesterday by Peter Riley, and I want to concentrate on one particular section of that. Here's some case law that Kent Hovind was convicted under. But let's go to my notes and again, you say, what's my motivation here? Because you guys, like I said, this human law is absolutely against my nature to spend a lot of time. But my motivation is to see Judge Margaret Worston Rape Catherine Rogers behind bars, to see Michelle Heldemeyer behind bars, to see IRS Special Agent Scott Schneider behind bars. I want to see all three of those people wake up in the morning and spend 36 years, because the Bible says you need to pay back fourfold. They stole 9 years of Kent Hovind's life. So not only does Michelle Heldemeyer, IRS agent Scott Snyder, and Margaret Worston Rape Catherine Rogers need to have every single thing taken from them, their families destroyed, so their families doesn't even care about them anymore, and society will forget about them. Not only do they need to wake up in a cold, isolated cell, they need to be strip searched on a weekly basis, if not daily basis. They need to eat moldy food, but they need to do it for 36 years, right? 9 times 4 is, if my math is correct, is 36 years. So that's what my desire is and my motivation. And then not only that, I would like to see Kent have his name cleared. I would like to see him to be restored as not a felon, and I'd like to see him paid a buku of money, right, on for the challenges that he went through and the injustices that these people brought against him. But let me just go through my notes on the first 2 videos, and the first 2 videos are actually one video on YouTube. And then I want to discuss Peter Riley's article, or at least one section of that article. But here's my notes. Brady Byrum notes video 1. He talks about how Ken Hovind was convicted of 58 federal felonies, which is an absolute joke. Absolute ridiculous joke. Makes me angry even thinking about it. Joe Hovind was also sent to prison, and she was convicted of 45 federal felonies. Brady Byrum talks about the purpose of this video series is to reverse the fraud that was intentionally planned, orchestrated, and implemented against them. He also talks about people that study in detail our entire prison industrial complex believe that 14% of all convicts are innocent. That's for the people who study it in detail. I believe it's even higher than that if you want to go into this ludicrous war on drugs thing that has caused our prison inmate population to rise from like 300,000 2 decades ago to 2.3 million. But in any event, Brady also states that church ministers need to watch the video specifically so that pastors will begin inviting Ken Hovind to speak at their church, because Ken Hovind is not getting the invites that he used to get before he was convicted and branded a felony by this illegal, wicked judge and prosecutor, Michelle Heldemeyer, and illegal, lying, unethical IRS agent, Scott Schneider. So that's the purpose, right? Is to reinstate Ken Hovind's good name, overturn his charges, convict those evildoers that came against Ken Hovind, and then also to have restitution paid back to Kent with a buku of money for all the property and the ministry funds that the IRS stole directly from the Hovind ministry. All right, so video 1 goes over some legal terms, right? And Brady talks about how it's important that we absolutely have to know the legal terms in order to understand the videos. So that's good. I understand. We got to understand the basics. Brady goes over federal case law. He goes over federal statutes, federal regulations, U.S. Constitution, the scope of the fraud, what can be done, and how you and I can help. He goes over all 8 videos. Okay, I'm gonna only comment on video 1 and video 2 tonight. It's gonna take me a while to go through all 12 hours. I don't know if it'll take me a month or 2 months, but I will do it. And even if I have to devote like 1 hour a week, I'll find 1 hour and I'll just, force myself to sit down with a notepad and watch 1 hour, and it'll take 12 weeks if we have to. That could be 3 months, but I will do it, and I hopefully will do it before 3 months. But anyway, I've already done, the first 2 videos, which I think is like 2.5 hours. But anyway, all right. Part 1 is introduction. Part 2 is legal definitions and case law. I want to talk a little bit about case law and what I have learned. Part 3 is failure to withhold and pay tax, which is one of the charges against Ken Hovind. Part 4 is structuring, the stupidest law in the history of mankind. Dennis Hastert, who I think was being blackmailed for his pedophilia or homosexual gay relationship. I can't remember which. All these congressmen always got skeletons in the closet. But he was being blackmailed for Dennis Hastert. I think he was Speaker of the House, if I'm not mistaken. But he was some position in Congress. I don't remember which. But he got convicted of structuring, and that got it all popular, right? It's the stupidest law in the history of mankind. And then the interference. Let me just say regarding structuring, if you think it's illegal to withdraw your own money from your own bank to pay your own bills, there's something wrong with you, right? We live in America, and we put our money in the bank, and if you want to withdraw your own money from your own bank to pay your own bills, that's your own dang business, and the IRS needs to stay out of your business. Not only that, but the IRS has been chastised by Congress, and the IRS has had to give back to hundreds, if not thousands, of people they've illegally seized property from, and the IRS has had to give back that property. Ken Hovind was on the very front end of all of this illegal activity by the IRS, and so the IRS is a wicked corporation or wicked mafia from hell. And all the wicked doers in the IRS are on a fast train to hell for what they're doing to legitimate business owners in America. Even small farms have been attacked by the IRS under this stupid structuring law. And Congress has chastised them and said, hey, you need to give the money back because you've been misapplying this structuring law to legitimate businesses. And that's exactly what they did to Ken Hovind, except they only did it for like the recent years, but they need to do it all the way back to when they misapplied these structuring laws to Ken Hovind. So part 4 is structuring. Part 5 is interference with officers, which I'll be looking forward to listening to that. But I believe Ken Hovind was praying for somebody on a radio, and there's nothing wrong for praying for God to deal with somebody. I pray that God deals with Obama. I pray that God deals strongly with Obama for the wickedness that he's done, and mainstream media won't touch the fact that he's put out a forged birth certificate, which has been proven up one side and down the other. And then we have part 6, criminal asset forfeiture. So not only did they illegally prosecute Ken Hovind for structuring, they doubled down, and then they took Ken Hovind's property. Right? They illegally took his property and seized his property, and I believe that Michelle Heldemeyer and IRS agent Scott Snyder and Margaret worse than rape Catherine Rogers are on a fast train to hell. And unless they repent, which is very unlikely at this point in time, they have done tremendously evil to Ken Hovind when they seized his property. They had no right to do so. He wasn't engaged in any illegal activities. All of that money was through legitimate donations by people that loved his ministry. All right, and then part 7 is what we hope to accomplish, or what Brady hopes to accomplish. And then part 8 is the action video. All right, it goes on to say that Brady and Ken Hovind himself needs help to vindicate Kent, clear his name, reverse his charges, and provide compensation. I left out actually bringing justice to the wicked doers, which is what motivates me the most, to be honest with you. All right, video 2. Then we move into video 2. Okay, this is where Brady starts to give definitions, and I'm talking about very legal, detailed definitions for legal terms. Legal terms of fraud, and Brady goes through the legal definition of fraud. Legal, intentional perversion of the truth, but he goes in much deeper detail than what I will do in this summary. Then Brady talks about stare decisis, which is the legal principle for determining points in litigation according to precedent. That's why case law is important, but you can use case law to argue for and against many legal positions, but you have to pick case law that is not only offers the defendant due process, but also is compliant with the United States Constitution. Okay, and so Brady uses case law that not only offers Ken Hovind his due process, but is compliant with the United States Constitution. Of course, you can find case law that says otherwise, but that case, just because a judge has committed treason and rewritten the law, they're basically redefining the law from the judicial branch. What Brady does is he goes back and looks at the intent of the law. He looks at why was the law written and what was its intent. And so just because you can have case law for a position or against a position, you have to find case law that is compliant with the United States Constitution and offers the defendant his proper and due process. And that's exactly what Brady does. And he helps us understand this concept of stare decisis. Brady also mentions a legal term called in pari materia, okay, which is their statutes in pari materia must be interpreted in light of each other since they have a common purpose for comparable events or items. It's basically not to be narrow-minded and to look at one particular item, but to look at the entire picture and many, many things that are laid out on the table. And that's what Brady does for us. He doesn't just pick one particular section of a statute and read one sentence. He says we're going to look at lots of different things and lay everything out on the table for us so that we can have a broad picture to understand what really is going on here and the intent of the legislative body that defined and created these laws. Brady also helps us understand what color of law is, and just because somebody does something under color of law doesn't mean that it's legal. What IRS agent Scott Snyder did may have been done under color of law, doesn't mean that it's legal and doesn't mean that it was right or ethical. Same thing with color of office, colorable. Then also Brady helps us understand the vagueness doctrine, which is a law that I think it has to be this word fairly uniform is unconstitutional, and you can't have vague laws in the land, because if you have vague laws, it gives your judicial and enforcement branch the ability to arbitrarily enforce laws, thus putting whoever they want to in prison because the laws are very vague. So our laws have to be clearly defined, and that's some of the concepts that Brady expounds on for us. Then also there's exculpatory evidence. We all understand from the Schaefer-Cox case how the prosecutors can withhold exculpatory evidence, and that was written about in detail in Sidney Powell's book, License to Lie, Exposing Corruption in the Department of Justice. And if the prosecutors or if the court does not allow exculpatory evidence, then they're not allowing the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They are withholding evidence that would clear the defendant. And that's what was done in Ken Hovind's case. It's been done in many, many cases throughout our land. We're going to get into case law. Brady talks about currency transaction reports and how that it was the responsibility of the bank, not the actual depositor. He talks about why these structuring laws were brought into place, and it was to prevent money from re-entering the United States to fund more drug activity from these, mafia and drug dealing types. He talks about the Anti-Money Laundering Act, how the banks had to. There was a comment in here about suspicious activity reports. Brady talks about the USA Patriot Act. And then Brady also talks about how the IRS has in recent years been ordered to give back illegally seized assets under the auspices of structuring. And this Ken Hovind, they need to look at Ken Hovind's case because he was one of the on the forefront of this illegal activity, illegal seizures by the IRS. The IRS needs to give back Ken Hovind what they seized, and I would say about another several $100 trillion for putting him in prison and destroying his family. But then Brady goes through various case laws. And then these are the examples: U.S. versus Reynes versus Esparella versus Varbell versus Anzalone versus Richter versus 200,000, California bankers, and versus Mirsky. And Brady does a very in-depth report on every one of these case laws and describes for us why this structuring law was even developed in the first place, and goes into details of how this case law applies to Ken Hovind's case. And so that's my notes from Brady's video. Now I want to get into this blog that was just put out yesterday by Peter Riley. And let me say that Peter Riley and I, we have a fairly good rapport. He sends me video recommendations. I think he's the one who recommended I watch Turned Out: Sexual Assault Behind Bars. I absolutely was appalled by the video, but I'm glad that I watched it because it gave me a brutal, honest look into our prison system and how sexual assault is rampant in our prison system. And there are some people that are trying to stop prison rape. And Peter Riley has shared with me some of these organizations. I'll look into them as I have more time, or I'll try to anyway. But Peter Riley and I totally disagree. As I read his article, I could see that he is definitely trying to side with the mainstream thought. I wouldn't even call it mainstream. Let me take that word back, because I'm not going to let Peter Riley have the word mainstream. I would say that as much as Peter Riley and I may get along and we may have a good rapport, I don't believe he's a Christian. I believe he's a Unitarian Universalist or Universal Unitarian or something to that degree. My understanding is they have a lot of beliefs. One of their beliefs is they take their knowledge and wisdom from all the books of the world, and the Bible is just one of those many books, whereas I believe that my knowledge comes from the King James Bible, and it's the perfect inerrant Word of God. It's my instruction manual from my Creator. But regardless of our religious differences, when I read this article by Peter Riley, it's apparent to me that he wants to take the side that Ken Hovind was legitimately, He's legitimately convicted, right? He doesn't give any sort of credence or credibility to Brady or the fact that Ken Hovind was targeted by a wicked judge, a wicked prosecutor, and a wicked IRS agent, Scott Snyder. And I want to go down to this section right here. Okay, let me just make this a little bit bigger. You guys see this? And Peter Riley writes, what about later case law? Okay, and then Peter writes, what is odd about the whole package is the notion that Brady Byrum thinks he has proved that all structuring convictions are invalid, and he maintains that Judge Rogers is criminal for not reaching the same conclusion. if Kent and Joe Hoven had been the only people to be convicted of structuring, he might have a point, but they are hardly alone, as you can see here. And then he gives a link to other people that have been convicted on structuring. One of the points that Brady brings up is that when you have legislative statutes and, United States code and stuff like that, that there has to be enforcement. It has to be self-executing or self-enforcement, along with enforcement code written along with the article. Written along with the law. And so Brady provides very good reasons for why structuring is not, illegal. And they may say that it's legal, but I think you guys may remember when this was all going down, I went to my bank and I videotaped myself withdrawing $9,999.99, and I held up a sign in front of the camera and I said, "This is Judge Margaret Worst and Rape Catherine Rogers' phone number. Why don't you guys call in a felony and see if you guys can have her put me in jail?" Nothing ever happened. Matter of fact, a week or two later, Congress came out and apologized that the IRS was seizing money from legitimate businesses. The reason I didn't feel at risk in making that video and uploading it is because I'm not doing illegal drug running, right? I'm not doing illegal activity with my money, and so I shouldn't feel nervous or terrified that the IRS is going to come SWAT team raid my house, even though they did do that to Ken and Joe Hoven. But Peter goes on to write, "I have to confess that I have not listened all 12 hours. I'm more of a reader, but I think I have extracted a key piece from the first video at 2613. It is the list of cases that Mr. Byrum will use to build his argument. What I find interesting is the statute that the Hovens were proved to have violated, 31 USC, and then he goes to this article here, which is the structuring transactions to avoid reporting requirement prohibited. Okay, but what this statute says is that you cannot structure your cash withdrawals, pronouncing that right, in order to avoid the reporting requirement, cash transaction reporting, which is only a requirement of the bank and not of the withdrawer. So, what Peter goes on to write, so none of the, he says that what I find interesting is the statute that were proved to have violated 31 USC 5324, structuring transactions to avoid reporting requirement, was added in 1986. So none of the case law relates to that statute directly. There is that's why we need to go back to the definition of stare decisis, right? Stare decisis specifically says that previous cases dealing with this particular topic need to be considered, and that we need to have a foundation of case law that is compliant with the United States Constitution, as well as gives the defendant proper due process, and that we look at everything as a whole in para materia, right? And so that's my understanding anyway. But going back to what Peter writes, he says there is quite a bit of post-1986 case law that is actually about the statute that Hovens were convicted under. In some instances, there were acquittals based on lack of willfulness, but the statute has been upheld. U.S. versus McPherson, for example, was decided in 2005. Byrum's apparent lack of discussion of case law after the statute in question was passed, at least in my mind, greatly weakens his argument. Frankly, arguing that a judge is criminal for not overturning a statute that has been upheld is kind of preposterous. Okay, so that's what Peter Riley had to say about Brady Byrum's use of case law as it applies to the structuring. And so it appears that Peter Riley is taking the position that that Ken Hoven and Joe Hoven were legally and fairly prosecuted for structuring, and that the time they spent in prison is absolutely appropriate based upon the law of the land, and that Peter Riley does not seem to express any dissatisfaction with the fact that that occurred to Ken Hoven. Now, he didn't, he didn't say that specifically, but you don't see anything in the article about any sort of reluctance or hesitation or any sort of like appalled, that Ken Hovind would spend 9 years in prison for withdrawing his own money from his own bank to pay his own bills with legally donated money. And so I would offer, and that's why I didn't want to give Peter Riley the word mainstream, because I believe if the American people were told the truth in simple terms and take away all this legal junk, take away stare decisis and in para materia and case law and United States Code Section 5324, Statute 5 or whatever, I believe if the American people were told in very simple and straightforward terms that Ken Hovind spent a great deal of those 9 years in prison for withdrawing his own money from his own bank to pay his own bills with legally raised money through legitimate donations to his ministry, that they would be appalled, right? And they would be appalled that we destroyed a man's family and took away all his property, right? And that the United States government subjected Ken Hovind to being a felon for the rest of his life simply because he withdrew his own money from his own bank to pay his own bills with legitimate money. Okay? And so my position is I will go into this 12-hour video that Brady has put together, and I'll try to learn the points that Brady wants to make. But I would say let's all just pull back up to a 30,000-foot view here and have a little bit of common sense and ask ourselves, was it right? Do we feel as a society that the right thing happened to Ken Hovind, that because he withdrew his own money from his own bank and was not participating in drug running, was not participating in any illegal sort of underhanded mafia activities, was Ken Hovind treated fairly in our court system when he was made to be a felon for the rest of his life, lose his reputation, his family, parts of his family disowned him, his wife divorced him, and he's going to spend the rest of his life as a felon. Not only that, but all of the ministry funds were taken and seized by the IRS. Just from a simple, common sense perspective, you know what, folks? I believe that mainstream, and I rarely claim mainstream on my side. I'm usually on the outside of mainstream. But in this particular case, I think that even mainstream would agree with me that what was done to Ken Hovind was horrific, and that Judge Margaret Casey Rogers and Michelle Heldemeyer and IRS agent Scott Schneider targeted Ken Hovind. And they are wicked for what they did. And it doesn't matter that it was done to other people. As a matter of fact, the IRS was chastised by Congress, and the IRS has had to return millions of dollars to legitimate business owners. It's just they haven't got around to recognizing Ken Hovind yet as being part of that people that were affected by this unjust application of the structuring law. And so, anyway, folks, I wanted you guys to understand what's going on with the article by Peter Riley. I'll put the link in the information bar so you can read this yourself. I wanted you guys to have my notes from part 1 and 2, and this is after watching 2 hours and 43 minutes. I'm going to try to make my notes later on as well. And man, it just takes a long time to talk about this stuff, but I tell you what, if I can contribute even a little bit to Judge Margaret Casey Rogers, Michelle Heldemeyer, and IRS agent Scott Schneider waking up in a prison cell, you know what? I'm going to spend the time, and I'm going to make the effort. God bless you guys. Have a great night, and Happy New Year.